So we've got a good understanding of your background, and we understand now that you got a screw lift up here that made you want to go into homicide. But I mentioned earlier we'll get you some psychological help if you need it, if you request it.
Too late.
But but what I'd like to talk about now is some of the more interesting cases that you were involved with. And Vic told me this, that there was a mob criminal out of the Boston gangs up in Boston, or organized crime gangs in Boston, by the name of James Bulger, more commonly known as Whitey Bulger. And we know he was all arrested, 10, 12 years ago, I think it was.
Yeah, something like
I
that.
think he's since passed away in prison.
Yeah, he was killed in prison. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but were you involved in Whitey's case?
I was. By total dumb luck, we got the case in 1982 before I even came to homicide. One of the people involved in the many schemes that the Winter Hill Gang, as they were known, was running was a skimming operation from World Highlight, and we had a very popular highlight front on here. People would come and bet on the games and things like that. And so these guys had their fingers in that business. The guy's name was John Callahan, and the Winter Hill Gang was really Whitey Bulger and all his people did 98% of their work in Boston. That was their home base. That's where they all were from. But when they killed Callahan, and we didn't know who killed him at first, but we found out later. But when they killed Callahan, they killed him in Miami. So that's what got our department involved in that.
Right.
And the original lead detective, a guy named Shelton Merritt, worked the case and ended up retiring, never solved it, but had done enough work on it to be able to identify the people involved in the Winter Hill organization. And a bunch of them ended up getting indicted on a federal case up in Boston, and it made the newspaper. And there's a very small thing in the Miami Herald about it. And lieutenant walked by my desk one day and dropped that newspaper on my desk and said, "See what you can find out about this. Go pull the case file. See if we can shake something loose on that case." And that's what got me started on it.
Wow.
And I think that's what got me involved for the better part of the next 4 years, actually.
Whoa. And what was your focus there in the Miami region?
Well, our focus was solving the murder of John Callahan, right? Trying to find enough evidence to prove who killed him. He was found in the trunk of his car, shot, I think, a couple of times, and at Miami International Airport. So they had shot him and killed him, put him in the trunk of his car, parked the car at Miami International Airport. And kind of interesting, there was a dime on his chest. Now, back in the day, it cost a dime to make a payphone. And so you're probably familiar with this old saying, like diming somebody out meant you were ratting on them. You made a phone call to the police that was diming somebody out. So we saw that. The original detective saw that and went, "Oh man, this is a message from the mob."
Yeah.
It turned out not to be. I'll tell you what happened later. Remind me if I don't.
Okay.
But it was nothing like that. But this case was very complicated because none of the players were Miami people. They were all Boston people. And I ended up spending a lot of time in Boston. I think I took a good 17, 18 trips to Boston on this case alone. There were several agencies involved. There was a task force involved in going after them. And what really complicated matters was there was a lot of evidence and witness testimony of corruption within the FBI on this whole thing. And the FBI office in Boston was divided, very much divided between the people who were sympathetic to Whitey Bulger's handlers. Nobody knew for many, many years that Bulger and his partner, Stephen Flemmi, were FBI informants. Nobody knew this even within their own organization. So when this whole thing came out in 1997 during this indictment, and they started doing preliminary hearings, I believe it was Flemmi came out, or Flemmi's lawyer came out and said, "Well, my guy was an FBI informant. So these things you're indicting him for were all forgiven and done at the behest of the FBI." And this shook up the whole world. Right? That's what started this whole thing, and that's what caused their main hitman, John Martirano, to say, "Oh no, I didn't know this, and now I want to play ball." So the next couple of years involved Martirano. We were trying to bring Martirano on board as a witness against the rest of the organization, particularly Whitey Bulger.
I just read this not long ago. I forget how many murders it was that he was suspected of being involved with. Was it 18?
I think altogether it was somewhere in the low 20s, like 21 or something like that. And I think his eventual plea was to 17 of them, I think.
Yeah, and I think there's a movie out that I saw, Black Mass, that's supposed to be about the Whitey Bulger story, and
The Black Mass. Yeah, and there's a bunch of books too.
Yeah, it's a shame that people like that get glorified in film.
Right.
I had gone to do a documentary. I don't even remember what channel it is. I think it might be the Gangland series that's out now. And they interviewed me in Boston, so I flew up there for the day. Spent one night up there, and you get to this warehouse where they're doing all the filming, and you're in like a dressing room, and I'm changing clothes, and this older man comes in, and I didn't know what he was there for, and I said, "Hey, who you with?" And he looked at me with that Boston accent. He's like, "What the hell you mean? Who am I with?" I said, "Are you a retired police officer?" And was, boy, let me tell you, that's a wrong thing to say to him. He worked for Whitey Bulger.
Okay.
And he was letting me have it. I'm like, "Hey, dude, it's, hey, Whitey's dead or he's in jail, and I'm retired, and I don't know what your problem is." So it was kind of strange that, this guy's reaction, but I guess he was a gangster through and through, and he was an old man, but the way he reacted, I'm like, man, I think if I had a gun, I might have pulled it out on him.
Wow.
Those folks make you very nervous.
Yeah.
So how did that case eventually work out?
Well, to encapsulate, 2 or 3 years worth of work into one idea, we finally got Martirano on board. It wasn't him that was the problem. It was, he wanted to cooperate, and he wanted to make a deal because he was facing all these murders, and we wanted to close the murders, which included the murder of John Callahan, which was the one I was assigned to.
Right.
And I think we all came to the conclusion that we weren't going to be able to solve them without Martirano. There was just no other solid testimony or evidence that would help us get enough probable cause to make an arrest on any of them without his help. And of course, he was willing to confess. His lawyer gave us a proffer and everything. And so we had to get a whole bunch of jurisdictions up in Boston, different counties where some of these murders happened. Tulsa, Oklahoma, where one of the murders happened, and of course in Miami. So we had to have this massive thing, and then we had a lot of pushback from the FBI. They wanted to be involved. Martirano did not want them involved. And make a long story short, we finally got to the point where everybody was willing to sign off on the deal, which was, very much a deal with the devil. Here's a guy that dropped a hammer on upwards of 20, 21 people, and we're giving him a deal. And it wasn't the easiest decision in the world. And, a lot of people were involved in it, the federal prosecutors and the guys on the task force, which were phenomenal guys. Worked with them for 4 years on this, and learned a lot about where to drink in Boston. After hours. Okay.
What's priorities?
Right. I mean, they were strategic about it. They really were. But, so we finally got to the point where we sat down with him in the basement of the federal building in Boston, and 4 hours, he told us details of every single murder. Wow. And, so which resulted in our department getting a warrant, first degree murder warrant for Whitey Bulger. And we also had help from Stephen Flemmi. Flemmi also cooperated because he was facing life and he knew it. And he wasn't a young man. He was in his mid-70s. He knew he was going to die in jail, in prison. And we went up and interviewed him as well. And he was able to corroborate a lot of what Martirano said. So that helped. Um, but Martirano got a sweet deal, man. He got like 15 years. He only served like 3 or 4. He's out. He's out, you know. But again, would we have ever solved any of those cases without his help? Probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. That is, you talk about a catch-22 or a conundrum, or whatever word you want to use. Standing back looking at it, if you're not involved in the case, it ticks you off. Especially from a law enforcement point of view. I'll give you an example. There's a former head of the Gulf cartel in Mexico, OCL Cardenas, was arrested a number of years ago. He's the one that started Los Zetas into the drug business. They became the armed faction for the Gulf cartel, committed probably thousands and thousands of murders. And when he came to the United States, OCL cooperated. His sentence, and a lot of people went to jail, a lot of assets were seized, a lot of dope was seized. He only got 25 years in prison. You and I are recording this interview on August 14th. OCL will be a free man on the 30th of this month. And in his judgment committal order, there's no deportation order. So the head of the Gulf cartel, former head of the Gulf cartel, and the guy that initiated Los Zetas in Mexico, is going to be a free man walking around in the United States.
That's incredible. Yeah, I know. It makes
just boggles your mind.
Yeah.
You guys probably said the same thing that we did. If the public only knew.
Right. And this was the type of situation where you had this guy he was a hitman, but he wasn't a hitman by trade. In other words, he wasn't a guy that other people could hire.
Mm-hmm.
He was a founding member of Winter Hill. And the way he described it was, they didn't have to really pay me. If something would have happened to us, I was going to go down too, right? If they were going to take down our organization, I was going to go down too. So if somebody needed to go, I didn't need to be told twice that they needed to go. I went ahead and did it.
Self-preservation.
Exactly.
Wow. I mean, that's a big name case. That's I honestly, when Vic told me about that, I was surprised that had a connection to Dade County, but I shouldn't have been, because I remember seeing organized crime clubs down there in Dade County. I think there's one, I don't know if it's still there, Treasure Island.
Yeah.
But it's just.
Well, truthfully, at that time, and probably even now, you went down the street and talked to 100 people in Miami and said, "Who's Whitey Bulger?"
Mm-hmm.
They would have said, I don't know, you might have gotten 3 or 4 that knew who he was.
Yeah.
Up in Boston, you get out of the airport and hop in a cab and go, "Hey man, where's Whitey?" And everybody had a theory. Well, this is when he was a fugitive, about where he was and who was protecting him, and everybody up there. He was legend up there.
Yeah. Yeah. What's so give us another high profile case, or even better, maybe one of the most interesting cases you ever worked on.
There were a few. There was one that comes to mind where when I was on cold case, it started out as a missing person case. And it was a British businessman who was a very wealthy dude who was an investor, and he liked to find businesses to invest in. And he gets somehow mixed up with a couple of people here that had started a company right before Desert Storm and Desert Shield and that whole thing was really heating up. And these folks were going to manufacture surgical equipment, surgical gowns, disposable things, and gloves and whatnot that people would use in field hospitals in the military. Sounds like a very viable thing.
Right.
And certainly a lot of investors thought so. And they plunked down a lot of investors plunked down a lot of money. And this man had put in about a couple $100,000 of his money into it and thought it was very viable. And after a while realized that some things were fishy and stuff wasn't happening the way it was supposed to. And, where's our ROI and why aren't things happening? So he told them, he says, I'm coming down there and I think I'm going to get an auditor and all that. And so we found this out much later, but he disappears. And his wife called and said, my husband left London and he's down in Miami, but he hasn't called us in 2 weeks, and he calls every day to talk to his sons and whatnot. And the man's an adult; he's in his 40s, and so everybody kind of shrugged it off and said,
Hmm.
maybe he had a little fling, or who knows, he's going to come back. Um, but that wasn't the case. So missing persons finally gave it to us in homicide, and we worked on that case for a good 2.5 years, and found that this company was a massive fraud. The whole company was a fraud. They had a warehouse full of boxes that were all empty, and they used to bring investors in there and say, look away, this is all going to Saudi Arabia, and this is all going to Riyadh Air
Wow.
Force Base and all this stuff, and none of that stuff was actually happening. Um, and they duped a lot of people out of a lot of money, but this guy was now a threat to them, and we had to find out why he disappeared. And it was a very long, exhaustive investigation, um, and our squad, patting ourselves on the back here, but our squad did a great job on it. And the lead investigator was a guy named Jerry Crawford, who just did a tremendous job, and kept us all really in the loop with everything, and gave us good leads. And we finally got some people to talk to us, and we ended up um, getting the grand jury to indict both the principal of this business, whose name was Alex Lucio, and his partner was a woman named Maggie Carr. And we were able to get these indictments without a body. We had not found this man.
Wow.
We had to get him declared legally dead in court,
Hmm.
which is not an easy thing to do.
Hmm.
You have to show the court that you've exhausted all possibilities of where he might be. Um, but we got the indictments. We got uh, Lucio in, and Lucio spilled the beans and just started talking. And he was a very egotistical guy who loved to talk and was very proud of the fact that he had ripped all these people off. And my partner at the time was a guy named Greg Smith, who was one of the best, if not the best, interviewer I've ever met. The guy could, man, if you had a tough time getting a confession, he was as skillful and masterful at it as anybody. I put him up against anybody.
Hmm.
And he had Lucio wrapped around his finger, because he just, he played Lucio's ego and the whole thing. And Lucio told him everything, told him where they buried the body, and actually took us out on location, showed us where they had buried the body in this swampy area, no more than a couple miles west of our own police headquarters.
Wow.
It was right down the street. Um, and we dug up the remains of this man, and were able to get convictions on both of them. And they had a shooter that they brought in that was an ex-boyfriend of the woman, and we got them all, and that was a big one. That was a big one
Wow.
for us.
Wow. It's now we were talking, I think, before we started the recording here about going into cold cases and the rigors of being on call as the next homicide investigator up on the next murder that comes in, or the next body that comes in, which requires you to work maybe multiple days in a row without seeing your family and missing family events.
Yeah.
And kind of tell us how you got interested in cold case.
Well, I think it became kind of a necessity for me. As I said, my boys were getting older, and I had to decide whether I wanted to continue in regular rotation, what we call rotational homicide, and missing out on their football games and their soccer games and their Boy Scout campouts. And I just decided I didn't want to be that absentee dad that I
Hmm.
would have been if I would have stayed in that. So before the cold case opportunity came up, I was actually looking at leaving homicide and going to maybe another unit that had a more stable schedule, or even leaving the department. I thought about going to FDLE, which is,
Hmm.
for our listeners, that's the Florida Department of Law Enforcement. I had people that invited me to go there, and but as I was struggling with this, it's just like magic, dropping out of the sky. "Hey, we got an opening in cold case." I went, "Here I am." And it had, the former supervisor of the squad had even uh, extended an invitation to me years before
Mm-hmm.
and said, "If you ever want to come, we'd love to have you." So
But you got a good
it worked
reputation.
out well. Yeah.
And so tell our listeners how did that change your work life?
Oh, drastically. I mean, first of all, you're not going on any fresh cases, right? So when you come to work, you're working on more than one cold case. We had plenty to work on,
Mm-hmm.
and we had leads coming in on old cases. So that's that was our criteria, right? If the lead investigator on a case was no longer there, retired or moved out to another, transferred to another assignment, um, then when a lead came in or any information came in on that case, it went to cold case. That became ours. So we had a lot to work on, a lot of unsolved cases, and um, so I'd come in, 7 to 3, didn't have to change shifts. There were a lot of days I, came home at 7:30 or 3:30 rather. Um, Weekends off, so you know I was able to go on these Boy Scout campouts with my kids and go see games and things like that. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm glad I made that decision.
Yeah.
I didn't work as long hours. I didn't make as much overtime as I had before, but the my children were more important than the overtime at that time of my life, and I'm glad I did that.
Yeah. They learned who Dad was.
They needed to, and they always knew what I did and everything. I'd come home, but I just didn't want to do that. I didn't want to run the risk of having them resent me or
Mm-hmm.
me miss out on important parts of their life.
Yeah. Yeah. It was for me. It was my opinion is your priority should be God, family, job. But the reality is it's usually job, family, God, or job, God, family. But the job was always in the way. And
Yeah, and
it's
it's hard because you love the job. I love
mm-hmm.
it. Um, I was distraught when I thought about leaving.
Mm-hmm.
I really was. I didn't, it was hurtful, but it was more hurtful to think that these boys want to spend time with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget I went to um, one of these open house things at my son's elementary school. My younger son, I think he was like 9. And, they have you look at the work that they're doing in class and all this. And they kept little journals. And in Greg's, it said, there was one page that said, "Sometimes I don't see my dad that much."
Mm.
And that's like a spear through your heart, man,
Uh,
when
I
you're a
was going to
parent.
say, pull that knife out.
Yeah. And so I just, I made that decision, and it wasn't that difficult a decision.
Good for you. That is very unusual in law enforcement that somebody does put their family first.
Well, I'd spent, 7 years, I spent a lot of time in uniform, and then I spent 7 years um, pretty much living homicide work.
Yeah.
And we worked around the clock many, many times.
Yeah.
And come home, work, get 4 hours sleep, go back to work. And the trips to Boston. Now that's where cold case was a little bit different, where when I had Whitey Bulger, with the travel, but at least you could plan for that.
Mm-hmm.
So
Whereas I remember reading one case where you were down in Jamaica a couple of times and ended up the Jamaican cops really pulled one over on you.
oh
Man,
yeah, they were an interesting bunch down there because
oh my gosh.
corruption ran rampant, and you didn't know who to trust down there.
Yeah, yeah. It was, but it was interesting that when you got your point of contact down there was a DEA agent in the U.S. Embassy.
That's right. He was, and we actually worked with a friend of yours named David Tinsley, who
Oh yeah,
accompanied us from Miami. But yeah, the DEA agent was the attaché down there.
yeah. Tinsley's a good guy. We were young agents together in Miami there, and he stuck in there for quite some time. He ended up, I think he went to Charleston, South Carolina for a while.
Hmm.
Ended back down to South Florida, and has done extremely well in retirement years with his own company, worldwide company, as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
I'm glad we talked about him the other day because you told me about him before I read his name in your book. And I had reached out to him when we first, almost over 3 years ago when we were just starting Game of Crimes about being a guest on the show. And I wanted him to come on and talk about money laundering and financial investigations, which he was very experienced in, and he agreed to do it. But I know the man's running this, now a
Right.
worldwide successful company, and you hate to impose on his time, but I think I'm going to reach out and impose on him anyway and see if I can get him on here on the show, and he'll
Very
have
sharp
some great.
guy.
He is. When it comes to financial investigations, it
Yeah.
was amazing what they were doing. So, talking about those Jamaican posses, and this is not a shot at any particular agency, but you guys did develop an informant that you were working, and then I think the bureau offered to come in to help you. Was it behavioral profiles? I think is what I read.
Well, no, there was two agents that were working some narcotics cases that were mutually involved with with stuff we were doing, and um, we 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 had an informant. I forget how we met this guy, Jamaican kid, kind of not a real bright kid, but
Mm-hmm.
apparently knew all these some of these people involved in a case that we were trying to solve.
The one that wanted to watch.
That's right.
Yeah,
That's the one.
you got to tell
Um,
that story because it's funny.
yeah. So, and then we introduced him to the FBI and he disappeared for a while. So, yeah, like you said, we're not trying to disparage the FBI. It was just tough sometimes to work with them. It's always tough with local cops working with federal cops. There are different cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and they work things a different way. And I know a lot of great feds like you, David.
Oh, thanks.
But it was tough. It was tough sometimes to bridge that culture gap. But this kid, Oscar was his name. When we told him we were going to come down to Jamaica and talk to him, um, he said, can you do me a favor, and can you bring me a watch? I've never owned a watch.
Mm-hmm.
So I went and picked up like a $15 Timex, and we brought it down there, and I gave it to him. Man, he was like a kid at Christmas. He was just
Yeah.
overjoyed, and so we're talking to him and said, okay, we're gonna do a full debriefing with you tomorrow. So meet us in the lobby of the hotel tomorrow. He lived, I don't know, a couple miles away from this hotel. We were staying down there in Kingston,
Mm-hmm.
and so he doesn't show up, right? And this was the days before cell phones. Nobody was carrying cell phones, and damn, where's Oscar? And we got a little worried. Hope nobody caught on to him and took him out. Because that kind of stuff happened all the time down there.
Oh yeah.
Um, and I think he was a couple hours late. We'd kind of almost given up on him. He finally shows up, calls us from the lobby, and we come down. Oscar, where the hell have you been? You were supposed to meet us at 10 o'clock. And he goes, well, I didn't know what time it was. I said, I just gave you a damn watch. And he goes, yeah, but I don't know how to tell time. I can't tell time on it. I just wanted to watch it because it looks sporty and the ladies like it, My luck, I would buy a watch the guy I can't tell time.
If you'd known that, you'd have got him one with the digital numbers.
Well, they didn't have those. They might have, but yeah.
I laughed out loud when I read that one.
Oh man,
You never know. You just take certain things for granted, and that's when things happen to you.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my goodness. What about like drug-related homicides down there? Because I mean, Miami was wild. You were there. You were working homicides when the murder rate was just the Dayland Mall shooting, the FBI shootout.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact,
the FBI shootout really was not drug-related at all. But
yeah.
But we had when the FBI shooting happened, it was in 1986. We'd had a good 5-6 years of nonstop cocaine-related violence, and it was out of control. For the first few years that was
Mm-hmm.
happening in the early 80s, and even up until 85, 86 when I was there, we were still getting a lot of high-level stuff, right, happening with rip-offs, $1 million rip-offs and things like that, and low-level stuff, right, in the ghettos and things like that, all crack-related, which was called freebasing back then.
Mm-hmm.
Just a lot of things, and our death rate was through the roof, and we were very, very busy during that time.
Did you work on that FBI shooting?
I did. Almost everybody in homicide came to that scene. Um, and yeah, I was there. I didn't do anything really drastic on the scene. I was asked to try and track down some pictures that a lady had taken
Mm-hmm.
that we thought she had taken of the shooting in progress. As it turned out, the shots she took were when fire rescue had gotten there by the time she had put film in the camera. Again, 1986,
Mm-hmm.
no digital cameras. This was 35 millimeter film,
Yeah.
and so, but that took the better part of a couple of hours, 2 3 hours to get that lead done.
Is that the lady who an AP reporter got hold of the film and they were going to
Yeah,
publish it?
yeah. This crime scene was like no other crime scene I've ever been on. There were FBI agents, federal agents from just about every federal agency you can imagine
Mm-hmm.
there, out, around the scene, and the media was just the media had flown in from all over the United States and even other countries by the end of the day
Mm-hmm.
to cover this thing. And uh, so one woman who lived down the street from the shooting, my sergeant came over and said, "Hey, get with her. You know, she took some pictures and gave the film to somebody." So I talked to her and she says, "Yeah, I gave it to one of your people." And I said, "What do you mean?" And she pointed out a woman that was standing just a few feet away. So I went over and she's got a lanyard around her neck with an ID tag. From a distance, you might think this is a law enforcement person. They were all
Mm-hmm.
over the place,
Mm-hmm.
right? ATF was there. All kinds of people were there. Turned out she's an AP reporter, Associated Press reporter. And she had gone up to this woman and said, "We need your film." And this woman thought she was a detective. So she
Mm-hmm.
popped the film out and gave it to her. So I told this AP reporter, "We need your film.
Mm-hmm.
We need that lady's film." And I got a big runaround, like, "Oh, it's already been sent to New York," and all that, which was just BS.
Right.
So it took some phone calls and some stern talk on the phone with some higher ups in Associated Press before that got returned.
Yeah. And it was
And
still there
long
right
story
there in
short,
Miami, wasn't it?
what's that?
And that film was still right there in Miami.
It was. They had never left. Yeah.
Yeah. That's we had Eddie Morales, one of the FBI agents that was wounded in that case here on Game of Crimes back in March of last year.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when I went through the DEA Academy, they brought up the lead investigator, and I think it was Miami Dade. I think the guy was a sergeant, and they were reenacting the shooting for training purposes, and they were doing it right there on the FBI Academy. And so on Wednesday nights, we lived at the Academy. They had what they called agent enrichment night, and that was, you had to wear a suit and tie or coat and tie to dinner that night. And the good thing was you got steak for dinner, and they even put bottles of wine on the table. It's the only time they ever had alcohol out on the table. And then you had to go to the auditorium, and they would have a guest speaker, and whoever that sergeant was one of the lead investigators.
That was Dave Rivers.
That's it. That's his name. Yep. Wow, I can't believe I remember that. I remember reading Dave's name in the book, but
Yeah.
it didn't connect with me. But I think he spoke for almost 3 hours, and
Oh, Dave could talk for 2 days.
man, you could have heard a pin drop through
Yeah.
that entire presentation. It was interesting. It was scary. It was look what you're getting ready to get into, boys, because this is what happened to the bureau guys down there. And then to have Eddie come in and talk about the incident, he ended up getting wounded, and
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah,
hair
that's
raising.
one of the most dramatic things I think I've ever, been involved with in terms of the case unfolding the way it did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was kind of a personal thing for me because I grew up in that neighborhood. I lived in that neighborhood from age 11 to about age 20,
Wow. Well, that's the case that I think everybody refers to as the case that changed the FBI forever.
That's right. Yeah.
And we like to dig on law enforcement in general likes to dig on the FBI. And it's. I know a lot of people think we might be a little hard on them. It's all good natured fun unless you get in the higher ranks, and then it's real.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's the law enforcement culture where you pick on each other. But the truth is, when the Bureau did all their research on that and the changes that were made, that affected all federal agencies, and I'm sure a lot of the state and local agencies as well. Reviewing weapons that were being carried, the type of ammo, the power of the ammo, whether it's a a lead nose bullet or a hydroshock or whatever it might be. I mean, there were so many changes that came out of that. I remember one of the agents, I don't know if it's Eddie or one of the other guys, it might have been Jerry Dove, but as they were responding to the scene, took the revolver and put it under their leg so they would have easy access to it, and ended up in a
Right.
crash and the gun went flying through the car. And,
Yeah.
for me, that was a learning point. Don't do that.
There was a lot of things, and again, not to over criticize them. We weren't
Mm-hmm.
we weren't in that situation, but
Right.
these guys were on a special unit assigned for bank robberies. They were a bank robbery unit. They were looking for these guys. They knew pretty much what cars they were using, and they were looking for them because these guys had hit several times. And yet, some of them were carrying revolvers. Most of them were carrying revolvers.
Yeah.
And some of them were not wearing protective vests. And I know that because the woman I just talked about that lived down the street that gave her film to the AP reporter said that she got her camera out before it had film in it and was looking through the telephoto lens down the street and saw part of the shooting. Unfortunately, she didn't have film in the camera, but she described seeing agents with their guns out in the middle of the street holding their bulletproof vest in front of them with the other hand, like a shield.
Yeah.
And I mean, it just breaks your heart to think that these guys were not as prepared as they should have been. And again, rest in peace, Jerry Dove and Benjamin Grogan. I'm not to insult their memory at all, but that's just unforgivable. You can't approach a violent situation like that.
And I don't know about you, but I have made those same kind of stupid mistakes. Not that I would have never even thought to hold my vest up in front of me because I don't think that would work. I think one round would probably jerk that thing right out of your hands. But
Probably.
Again, it wasn't my call. They did what they
Right.
thought they had to do at the time, and like you said,
Right.
rest
They
in
did,
peace.
they had whatever resources they had, they threw it at them as best they could. And it was just a tragic day
Yeah.
all the way around.
So were you involved in the Dadeland shooting?
No, I was in the police academy when that happened.
Oh, okay.
So we were all talking about it.
Yeah.
and it was, and again, there's another place that in my youth, I rode my bike over there. Everybody went to Dadeland. That was a popular mall. It was one of the first enclosed malls in the country, from what I remember. I know it was probably the first one in Florida when it opened in 1967 or whatever it was. Everybody that lived down south knew Dadeland. So what a shocker for something like that to happen.
Yeah, everything I've read about that case, it was referred to as what really exposed the level of violence that the Colombians and Cubans were capable of when it came to drug trafficking.
It was like the kickoff. When in retrospect, it was like the kickoff for the cocaine wars.
Yeah. Whew, what a memorable event, huh?
Oh yeah.
They still make shows about that stuff. So when it comes to the cocaine related violence, what's a big or memorable case you remember directly involved with cocaine coming into South Florida?
Well, there was a lot. I mean, there wasn't a detective that worked in homicide at that time that did not get a cocaine cartel related homicide because they were coming in fast and furious. And anybody that's learned anything about Griselda Blanco, her organization was responsible for a good number of them, maybe most of them. And we were getting 30, 32 homicides a month.
Wow.
That's one a day. And that's not, we were also responsible for suicides and accidental deaths. So we were hopping. But I remember a case where a guy got machine gunned in front of his house. And the investigation revealed that he had ripped off $13 million from a load that he was responsible for. He was like the broker or whatever for this particular shipment that came on a Panamanian freighter. And he decided to just pocket 13 million for himself, thinking that nobody was going to see it or miss it. They found out, and they didn't bring you in for counseling. They just machine gunned you. That's the way they take care of problems, right? And there was a lot of that kind of stuff happening. There There were ripoffs where, these distributors were selling to people were coming from all over the country to buy, right? And so people would show up with literally millions of dollars in cash
Mhm.
to buy cocaine, to buy 600 kilos or 400 kilos or whatever it was. And hey, he's just a buyer. Let's just rip him off and kill him and take the money. And that
Wow.
that happened several times. We had lots of those. So yeah, there was one case where your DEA guys, were doing a sting up in Doral, and they had a CI in there, and when the CI gave the signal, the team knocked down the door, and the participants in this thing decided to flee, but the only place they could flee was off the balcony. So they jumped off the balcony. It was the third floor balcony. Two of them made it, and one guy didn't land right and went splat. So your guys called us and said, "Hey, we got a dead guy here that was involved in this thing." And so I remember going to that scene. It was a little apartment, like a 2-bedroom apartment, and there was a duffel bag in there with $800,000 in it, and I'd never seen that much money in one place in my life. And I'm sitting there, and I'm starting to, we had to count it, right? So crime scene guy says, "I'm going to go downstairs and have a smoke." I said, "Hell no, you're staying in here with me. I'm not going to be alone with this amount of money. There's no way."
That's a good good call.
And then, I've talked to other investigators like, yeah, 800,000. I mean, there were scenes where we would find millions of dollars
Mhm.
on crime scenes. It was insane to try and comprehend how much money was floating around the streets of Dade County back then. And anybody that's ever watched Cocaine Cowboys and heard
Mhm.
these guys being interviewed, this guy John Roberts and all that, here's a guy who had a 2-car garage, and he had it stacked from floor to ceiling with money, and he ran out of space and started burying it in his yard.
Wow.
Um,
That might be a
anyways,
good problem to have, Hmm.
well, I guess they thought so at the time, you know. But most of those guys were either going to end up dead or in prison, and that was the truth.
I remember getting there in '87 into Miami and hearing stories. And I'd read as much as I could about Miami, and you watch television, and you when I got there, the older agents were talking about, you're asking, well, what do they do with the money? I mean, there's so much money being generated. Why wouldn't we go after the money? And he said, well, we do. And this was before. Well, the IRS may have already enacted the SAR reports, suspicious activity reports,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually the $10,000 rule came in. But
Right.
these agents talk about these Maserati dealerships and Ferrari dealerships and Rolls Royce dealerships where people would come in with bags or suitcases of cash
Yep.
to buy $120,000 or $160,000 car.
Right.
And you can understand the position of the businessman, because it's, hey, I'm a capitalist. I'm in this to make money. But you would think at some point common sense would come in and say, yeah, I've dealt with a lot of rich people in this business selling Rolls Royces, and
Right.
none of the legal people coming in here do not bring me cash. You would think that light bulb will go off sometime.
Well, and the other people that were making money were lawyers.
Oh, yeah.
And we had a guy we were investigating one time, and we found out that he had a hit out on him. And we heard this from a very reputable source. They said, hey, there are people that, are going to be paid $500,000 to kill this guy. So we located his attorney. We knew who his attorney was. And we went to the attorney's office. We said, listen, we're not trying to play games with you here. We just want you to be aware that there's a hit out on your guy,
Mhm.
and he's our target in our case, but, in a homicide case himself. And he goes, all right, I appreciate that. And he's writing down the information. And he goes, are you guys going to charge him with a murder? And I said, it looks like we're getting ready to charge him pretty soon. And his lawyer said, good, more money for me.
Oh.
So, I mean, and that's the reality of those days, right? I mean, these guys made a ton of money off of these dopers. They made a lot of money off of them.
And that's the kind of attorney that gives attorneys bad names.
Well, I mean, he probably wasn't the only one who had that.
No, he
philosophy.
wasn't.
So,
Especially in the drug days. It was,
yeah.
wow. It was, I had a case up in North Carolina where we popped this guy from New York City, and he was bringing down, wasn't massive loads, but he would bring down 30 keys of coke at a time to rural North Carolina, a place called Salisbury, north of Charlotte. And he was doing it on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So it was adding up to quite a bit of cocaine coming in, and it was moving very quickly.
Mm-hmm.
And we built a case on him and arrested him. His first name was Malik. I'll never forget. And so he brings in a high-priced New York City attorney, and our attorney, our AUSA, assistant U.S. attorney, was a cop's attorney. His name was David Smith. I loved that guy. He would stand up. It didn't matter who it was. He'd stand up to him and he'd say, "You want a plea deal? Here's your deal. You're looking at 30 mandatory. Plead out to 25." And that was his deal. And he'd say, "This is a one-time offer. Take it now or leave it." So anyway, we were going along there, and the New York attorney, after he saw the evidence, he told Malik, he said, "You need to plead guilty to see what kind of terms we could get here." So Malik fired him. And Malik's like 30 years old. So he hires some high-priced Miami drug attorney. And that kind of guy comes in, and I think David said, "Are you going to come and try to get a deal out of me before this is all over?" And the guy said, "Nope, I don't care what you got. We're going to trial." Malik got life at 30 years old.
Well, I was going to say, North Carolina juries are a lot different than Miami juries. So
it was, well, and in federal court, when you're convicted, they issue I mentioned this earlier, a judgment committal order, and it has the terms of your sentence on there. And one of the lines is date of release. When you get life, it says upon death. Yeah, so here's this 30-year-old kid who thought we were just a bunch of country bumpkins there. And maybe I know I'm a redneck hillbilly, so I'm okay with that title. But I had him by the short hairs, and he paid for it.
Right.
But that attorney, I'm sure he got millions of dollars for it.
I'm sure.
And I don't want to waste your time. We've been going quite a while here, but there's a couple more questions I want to ask you.
Sure.
When you decided to retire from law enforcement, what was the factor that came along that said, my time's here, I'm ready to go?
It might have been a mixture of things. I was seeing things changing in the department, even within homicide. I think the leadership was changing, and I didn't have the appetite for the job as much as I did, when I was younger, and things were a little bit. And I'd been doing cold case for 15 years.
Wow.
I had at that point 27 years on, and a good buddy of mine called me and said, "Man, come work real estate with me. You'd be really good at real estate, and come with this agency, and you could be a realtor." And the real estate market was doing great at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Before it all went to hell. A couple of years before it went to hell, and so I went to real estate school. I took a week off and went to real estate school, and I really liked it. Learned a lot, and I thought it might be interesting work. And I said, "You know what? It's time for me to make a change." So I went ahead and put in my papers, and off I went.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can remember I was a cop for 38 years, and I would ask the older guys, the retirees, "How do you know when it's time to go?" And they said, "Murph, you'll know." Mm-hmm. And I've talked about that here before on the show, and it's like, that didn't help me a damn bit. I'll know when that time.
I don't think things were so bad that, like, oh my God, I got to get out of here. I probably would have stayed if something else hadn't come in and interested me as much as it did. And I thought, maybe I just need something new and fresh in my life to, start doing something different and learn some new things.
Well, and it's like you alluded to a while ago. There's an old saying: if you find a job you like, you'll never work a day in your life.
Right.
I know I found that job. I think you did too in law enforcement.
Oh, no question.
As you're getting older, and I had taken promotions up, and I'm stuck behind a desk now, and my job is more fighting with other federal agencies than it is doing any type of law enforcement. It started getting very frustrating, and then an outside opportunity came along with the Narco series and Netflix, so that timing was perfect on that. And I guess I did know when the time came along.
Right.
It's just
it's usually some outside compelling force that's drawing you away.
Yeah.
Too.
And before we get to the end here, I want to ask you about your daughter, Linnea. Did I get that right?
Yeah, right.
Linnea. And folks, this is. I talked to Ram about this before we started recording because I'd read about his daughter, and the last thing I will ever do is ask you to talk about something you're not comfortable talking about. And he agreed to talk about it because there's lessons to be learned here, and he's honoring his daughter. So, Ron, would you mind telling us about your 16-year-old daughter? What happened?
Yeah, she made she made some bad choices when she was driving. She was on a cell phone on a chat, on a
Mm-hmm.
video chat. Um, and like you said, I don't. Not only do I not mind talking about it, I've talked about it enough and actually given presentations on it because I want, especially young people, but everybody really, but young people, to know just how quickly your life can be taken away by not paying attention to what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And she was doing like what a lot of kids do, laughing, talking with her friends on this video chat while she's driving, and lost control of the vehicle and hit a tree, and she lost her life. And
Wow.
and it was it was devastating, and just that was 4 years ago. That was April of 2020.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so it's something that obviously turned our entire family on its head, and um, you never really get over those things. You just learn to live with it.
Mm-hmm.
And part of that for me was I have to send this message. And I think if Linnea was alive, she would want other kids her age to know, don't look at your phone when you're driving.
Yeah.
Put the damn thing away. There's no message or phone call or video chat that's so important that you're going to risk your life for it.
Yeah.
So that's what I think I wanted to get across, and that's why it's not that hard for me to talk about it anymore. Is I think I'm honoring her memory
Yeah.
when I do that, and if it changes one kid's mind, and if it causes one kid to put that phone away and saves their life, then again, she's it's a tribute to her.
Mm-hmm. When I was doing the research on this, I actually saw a picture of her, and wow, what a beautiful young lady.
Yes.
She was stunningly beautiful. Not just I'm not saying that because Dad's sitting here looking at me on the screen here. She was
Yeah.
just a beautiful young lady that I'm just so sorry for what you and your family had to go through there.
Yeah. Thank
And
you.
I'm a father of four, and I have two daughters, and you just worry continuously. And now I've got five granddaughters, and none of them are driving yet, but the twins are getting close. Just oh
Yeah. And I urge everybody that heard this story to share it with their
yes,
family. Try and spread the word, and just turn the thing off, put it on silent, put it away when you're driving. It's just get where you need to go safely.
yeah. There's no conversation. There's no LLL. There's no LOL or emoji that's important enough to put on there to endanger yourself or anyone else.
Yeah.
I got to tell you, here in Orlando, I've seen drivers doing things that I've never seen anywhere else in the world, and I lived in South America for 3 years. It's it's just unfreaking believe. It's every time you go out in the car, it's every single day, you'll see something that you haven't seen before that's just so dangerous.
Yeah,
Oh
Miami's no different. Miami's got we were known for our crazy drivers,
yeah,
right? And you're going down 95, and everybody's doing 75, 80. Here comes some guy doing about 100,
mm-hmm.
right? And then there's some other young guy that go, oh no, I'm not going to let him pass me, and they start racing
Yeah,
on I-95. It's like it's crazy.
yeah.
It's
That
crazy.
was, and I meant to tell you this earlier that when we lived in Fort Lauderdale, my wife and I, we fell in love with South Florida. We fell in love with Miami and Broward County and Dade County. And I mean, just that's our favorite place in the United States, believe it or not. It still is to this day.
Right.
And when we always planned to retire in Florida, not Orlando. We came here because our youngest daughter was here with her family, and they've now moved up to Atlanta. But so we're kind of, I won't say stuck here, but with the way interest rates are, I'm not certainly not selling my house to go for a 7% interest rate.
All right.
But we would have retired to South Florida, except for what you just said, the crazy drivers. That was the first place I ever saw road rage back in the late 1980s. I didn't even know what that was.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I know it's worse now. I've gone down to Miami and done some filming for different shows, and going down the turnpike, you see this guy and I'm a redneck. I drive a pickup truck, and this guy comes flying through there in a Ford F-150, 6 lanes of traffic heading south, and is changing lanes and goes over and hits a car, and they both go sliding off the highway. And I'm thinking, let me just get the hell out of here.
Yeah. We try to avoid taking drives on I-95 and places like that.
Yeah.
And our population has increased a lot, and traffic's gotten worse. But that also slows down the traffic.
Yeah.
right? So
Considerably,
yeah.
considerably. Um, a couple more questions. So after you retired, you got into real estate, but what else are you doing? Because I know you're doing something now right now that I think is very admirable.
Yeah, I started teaching. I got again. It was another friend who called me and said, "Hey, you're interested in teaching criminal justice at the high school level?" At the time, this is back in 2010, 09, 2010. I didn't even know that existed because it certainly
Mhm.
didn't exist when I went to school. When you went to school, we didn't have
Right,
anything like that.
right.
And I thought, well, gee, let me look into this. And I went and interviewed and got the position. And So I'm teaching this criminal justice curriculum that it really I enjoy. As a matter of fact, tomorrow's first day of school. Tomorrow's the kids come back to school, right? I don't know
Hmm.
what it's like in Orlando, but
They're already
here,
in.
yeah, okay. So they're starting tomorrow, um, and the kids really love it. I get to pretty much teach. I mean, there's standards and everything and benchmarks I have to adhere to, but I can pretty much teach the way I want to. And the third level of this curriculum is investigations. That's so the juniors are doing investigations, and I set up mock cases outside and mock crime scenes, and I put them in positions of being investigators, and they eat that stuff up, and I love it. I love doing that.
Oh, I would have
So
too.
yeah. So it's fun. It's a lot of work, but it's fun work, and it's fun to see to help them understand investigative principles
Hmm.
because most of them are not going to end up as cops, right? We know that they're not going to end up as investigators, but as you know, the investigative process
Hmm.
involves critical thinking. It involves solving problems. It involves things like not jumping to conclusions and assessing information, and that's going to help them no matter what they do.
And
I
this is
hope.
at the high school level. That is fantastic. I
Yeah,
never
yeah,
never even heard of it till you told me about it.
yeah. It's I'm very lucky working at a magnet school called Coral Reef Senior High. It's a great school, but there's a lot of schools that have these programs now.
Excellent, excellent. Did you start a security investigations company?
I started a private investigation company back in 2014. So
Hmm.
it's be 10 years now. And it was strictly private investigations. At one point, we wanted to branch out into uniform security. My wife and I own the business. And so we changed the name to Nyberg Security and Investigations. Um, and we really looked into it and we decided not to go into the security stuff. There's just way too much involved, and we were both working full time doing other things.
Yeah,
And so, but we kept the name because NSI sounds pretty cool, doesn't it? It sounds
yeah.
like
Sounds like
it sounds like a
CSI.
cross between CSI and NSA. So we kept the security in there so we could call it NSI.
I like it. Okay, last question for you here. Well, maybe two questions, but would you recommend, based on your past experience and what you're doing now, and you're seeing young people coming up that are preparing to go into college and select a career, would you recommend law enforcement for young people these days?
Well, a lot of people recommended against it when I did it, and
Hmm.
I did it anyway.
Yep.
So there's always going to be young people that do it no matter what. But certainly, uniform work in particular is way more dangerous than it used to be
Hmm.
when I was on the road. Um, we always had people that committed violent acts against cops, but we never had people. We didn't have the outright hatred and the social media misinformation and misperceptions that are out there, and we didn't have people hunting cops down
Hmm.
like we've seen many times over the last decade. That's just unfathomable to think that those things happened as often as they've been happening. So, and there's no way around it. If you want to be an investigator in a police department, a municipal police department, or a county agency, you're going to have to work uniform first.
Hmm.
You're going to have to work the road first, do the brown gown, or wherever it is you're working. Now the feds obviously is a different story. So you know, it, I've encouraged a lot of people. I said, look into going federal if you really want to just do investigations and you don't want any part of wearing a uniform. look into DEA, FBI, ATF, the other available things. So so it's hard for me to say would I recommend it. I have students in my classes that, Mr. Nyberg, I want to be an investigator just like you were, and what do you think I should do, and how should I do it? And that's turned into part of my teaching process, is helping them understand the realities of the job. And that includes things like being away from your family. That includes the physical dangers, the emotional dangers, right? And all those things I try to convey to them, and they're going to end up doing what they want to do anyway.
Yeah. It's extremely honorable occupation. It's what I call, it's a public servant, but some people look at that term as derogatory. I don't. I look at it as a badge of honor, to be quite honest, because you have consciously chosen to serve your fellow man. And I
consider it a privilege. What I did, I was privileged to do it.
Absolutely. So, it's. I encourage them, but at the same time, go in with your eyes open. So, Ram, I got to tell you, it's been an honor to have you on here. You're the first homicide investigator we've had in this. I'm into my 4th year here.
Oh, well, I'm honored for that. Yeah.
And the cold case thing is just so interesting. I guess I never really thought about it, that all of a sudden your work hours are changed and the urgency isn't there like it is when you're getting a fresh case coming in,
That's right.
towards the end of your shift, and now you're not going home for a couple of days.
Right.
So it's very eye-opening. I'd love to explore that more with you sometime. Maybe we can meet in person.
Sure.
I do want to mention, though, that if the listeners, if you want to find out more about Ram here, he's on Instagram at, and tell me if I've got this wrong, Ram, Miami Author.
I think so.
On Facebook, he's at Ramesh, Ramesh Nyberg, Nyberg.
Or I think Facebook. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, on X, formerly Twitter, is RameshMiami.
Well, I think that's actually at Nyberg PI.
Okay. Well, you heard it there, everybody. And then LinkedIn, I found you at Ramesh Nyberg. And he's got a website. Check this out, RameshNybergAuthor.com. So it's RameshNyberg. And I'll mention this all again in the debrief here. And then his books. He's got a couple books out. The one I mentioned earlier is Badge, Tie, and Gun, Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. And that's the one I highly recommend, especially if you're interested in homicides and what really goes on. You see the craziness that goes on, like the things with maggots crawling up your arms. And I know I wouldn't have been a very good homicide investigator. But that was just released in February this year, so that's relatively new out.
Right.
And then you wrote a book, The 10 Must-Haves to Be a Great Detective.
Right. Yeah. That really started out as a kind of a how-to manual for private investigators.
Okay.
And as it started getting bigger and bigger, I decided, heck with it, I'm just going to make it into a book.
There you go. And then he's written more than 400 articles for various magazines, and he had his own column in the Miami Herald. Do you still have that column?
No, that's been years.
Okay.
That's been years.
So this is a man who dedicated his life to law enforcement, but also had a love of writing and a love of music, and I think I read a love of bourbon. Is that what I read too?
Oh, I'm fond of my bourbon.
And
I try not to be too fond of it,
Understood. And a love of the Miami Dolphins.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Die-hard fan.
Thank you, Ram. Thank you, brother. It truly is an honor to have you on there. I appreciate you giving us your time.
Steve, it was my honor. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
All right. And if you'll hang on just for a minute, and to all our listeners, stand by for the debrief. Well, now, how about that? Our first full-time homicide detective here on Game of Crimes. And not a detective or investigator who did that as a collateral duty. This was a man with 22 years experience investigating homicides, suicide, and unattended deaths in a major city that was once famous for the number of homicides they had. That's Miami and Dade County, Florida, isn't it? Ramesh Nyberg, that was a full-time detective, and he was very successful at his chosen career. After many years working homicides, he was selected and assigned to the cold case squad. Now, that's something, I think I could find very, very interesting. Think about what you just heard from, we'll call him Rom. Think about what you just heard from Rom for a minute. These people see some of the most horrific sights anyone ever sees, and they don't see this in photographs. They see it in real life, very up close and personal. That has to have a negative impact to their psyche, don't you think? At least I think so. We heard Rom encountering situations where he had to go outside and get a breath of fresh air in order to go back inside and deal with whatever carnage there was that day. As a uniformed officer, I answered suicide and murder calls and unattended death calls, and although I saw the aftermath of those events, my job was to secure the scene, look for witnesses, and call the detectives. As exciting as working these types of cases may sound, there is a downside to it. The long hours spent at work, away from your family. And that's just one thing. I got to tell you right now, it's certainly not a Monday through Friday 9 to 5 job. But what about seeing all those horrific carnage situations associated with murder and suicide, the decomposed bodies, complete with maggots crawling around? Remember now, I warned you at the beginning in the introduction that this episode might make your skin crawl. While he's dealing with all these messes, Rom was constantly looking for evidence, anything that might provide a lead or a clue to how someone died. On top of that, he and the other homicide detectives worked closely with the medical examiner's office, which means they had to attend the autopsies. If you've never seen an autopsy, believe me, it's not a pretty sight, but it is necessary. Don't forget the responsibility, and this is not so good, the responsibility of delivering death notices to the deceased person's family. I only had to do that a couple times in my career, and like Rom said, it's one of the hardest and least desirable things that an officer ever has to do. Think about that for a minute. What would you say? What can you say to a family who just lost someone to a gruesome murder, a suicide, even an accident? Most of the time, the officers don't know the families, but they still want to deliver a horrible message in the most compassionate way they can. It's not a fun thing. I'm not sure being a homicide detective would have been my chosen specialty in law enforcement, even as cool as it may sound. Now, the cold case investigations, I think that would have been very interesting as well as challenging. But just like almost anything else, this is a field that requires a certain type of person who can deal with everything like what Rom and his colleagues were seeing on a daily basis. And thank God we have men and women willing to do that job. But think about this also. What about the families of these detectives? The families are what I always refer to as our unsung heroes, and I always want to recognize them. This is true for families of all law enforcement personnel, the military, and our other first responders. Our families are expected to move forward with their lives while their loved ones who aren't around because of their duties protecting the public, our country, and investigating some of the most gruesome crimes you'll ever encounter. Many times, and I really mean a lot of the time, these loved ones were dealing with our situations that most people never encounter, situations that may result in things like anxiety, stress, post-traumatic stress syndrome. Obviously, these conditions can cause lots of negative reactions. And that's from the loved ones that might cause them to withdraw from their families. And I'm talking about the officers in the military and the first responders. They may try to self-medicate with alcohol or drugs. They may not want to share what they're going through with their spouse or significant other because what happened or what they saw was so gruesome. They may even consider suicide. There are so many negative things that can come from these high-risk occupations, not just in law enforcement, military, and first responders, but it results in an alienation within their families, doesn't it? I know many families felt like a family without a husband or a dad, and unfortunately, I think my family was like that many times. You heard Rom say he was having a hard time thinking of any homicide investigator who hadn't gone through a divorce. Now, quick note here. If any of our listeners are going through any of these negative effects, please don't think you have to go through this alone. Talk with someone. Get some professional counseling. Get your life back. Most agencies have some type of employee assistance programs. Take advantage of those. If you don't have access to something like that, there's a National Suicide and Crisis Lifeline. Just dial or text 988. That's it, 988. The lines are manned 24/7, 365. Get the help that you need and that you've earned. Don't go it alone. Fortunately, Ram had the foresight and desire to spend more time with his family, to watch his children grow up, and to participate in their lives. That's when he moved over to the Cold Case Squad. What a challenge that would be, right? And that's how Ram finished out his law enforcement career. So let me say right here, none of us, it sounds like I'm bitching and complaining, but I'm not. I'm not complaining about the hours required to be engaged and to be a successful police officer. And that goes for our heroes in the military and our other first responders. But we love the job that much. I look at it as a calling. Not everyone can do it. And the same can be said for other high-risk occupations as well. Sure, most of us sit around and we complain to a certain degree about our jobs, but that's usually with our colleagues and our friends and our families. But we still hang in there with that job for a variety of reasons, don't we? In law enforcement, I'm telling you, we hang in there because we enjoy the opportunity to help others. So please don't think any of us are complaining about the time spent at work. It is detrimental to our families, but it's also for the right reasons. And I got to say right here, God bless Ram, his colleagues, and all homicide detectives and investigators for having the ability and the commitment to deal with these situations. Now, as you heard towards the end of the interview, Ram was gracious enough to tell us about the death of his daughter, 16-year-old Linnea. You guys know I won't ask our guests to talk about anything they're not comfortable talking about, especially on a personal level. Before we started the recording, I asked Ram if he would like to tell Linnea's story. He didn't hesitate. He said, yeah. And why? Because he's still trying to help others by talking about what happened to her. You heard him yourself. Ram said that if one single person benefits from hearing about what happened to Linnea, then it's made his efforts worthwhile. And Ram is honoring Linnea's memory by sharing her tragedy with others. I can't begin to imagine what Ram and his family must have gone through after that accident, and I hope none of us ever have to endure that type of emotional pain and loss. This week's episode, the interview of Ramesh Nyberg, is dedicated to the memory of his beautiful daughter, Linnea Nyberg. May she rest in peace in the arms of God. After Ram retired from a lifetime in police work, he didn't decide to sit back, drink margaritas, and watch the Dolphins play football, did he? Well, he may be doing some of those things, but he also found another way to continue helping others, and that was through teaching high schoolers about criminal justice and law enforcement. I got to say, until meeting Ram, I didn't even know those things were taught in high school. Where have I been? After Ram's interview, I mentioned this to a friend of mine in the Orlando Police Department. We'll call him Captain Jerry. He told me that they're doing the same thing here in Orange County. Man, what a fantastic way to show teenagers what police work is really about, to maybe give them that inspiration and desire to support our police officers and agencies, not defund the police like we hear so many idiots out there spewing hatred and false information. Whether or not these young people go into the criminal justice field, they're better prepared to deal with life, and they have a better understanding of why things happen the way they do in law enforcement. It certainly isn't what we all see on TV, is it? Reality, my friends, that's what we're talking about here. Ram, it was an honor and a pleasure to have you on Game of Crimes. Thank you for your service to your community and what you're doing to teach young people in high school. And thanks for taking the time to tell us about your adventurous life. To you, I say, my friend, well done, brother. Job well done. So if you liked this week's episodes, head over to Apple or Spotify and hit those 5 stars. It only takes you a minute, and it really helps support the show. And on YouTube, click on that subscribe button. I need you to click on the subscribe button, okay? You can click on the like button and, feel free to share with all your friends. You can send me your comments on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or to our email address, which is gameofcrimespodcast@gmail.com. Our website is gameofcrimespodcast.com, and that's where you'll find all our episodes, the book list, some merchandise, and some other stuff on there. On Facebook and Instagram, go to Game of Crimes Podcast, and on X, type in Game of Crimes. Also on Facebook, go to Game of Crimes Fans. Game of Crimes fans and join the best private group on the Facebook platform. The group is run by our favorite mafia queen, Sandy Salvato. Watch out. She rules with an iron fist, but she does wear a velvet glove. And if you're looking for even more content, go to patreon.com/Game of Crimes and sign up. We have several monthly episodes that range from silly to serious, so come on over and join the fun. Do me a favor and tell your friends about Game of Crimes. Invite them to come and check out the show. I appreciate you guys helping me spread the word about the best weekly true crime podcast out there. Your support truly is what keeps me going. And remember, we can have different ideas and different opinions, but that doesn't mean we cannot continue to be friends, okay? Finally, thank you all for joining me to play the biggest, the baddest, the most dangerous game of all, the Game of Crimes. I'll see y'all next week.